Everything from the past just doesn't add up. Sure, there were some elements that could have been right, but if you look closely, there's something off. It feels like insecurity, a lack of comfort, and an uncomfortable awkwardness. It's not wrong to feel awkward. Many people do. But when it's so noticeable, it becomes hard to ignore. Candace Owens didn't just point out a timeline that was written by Harry, she practically unraveled it. As soon as she did, it all fell apart, like a poorly constructed alibi. The whole thing started to feel less like a story, and more like a dramatic plot that never had the right facts checked. When Candace speaks, people brace themselves. But this time, it wasn't just drama she sparked. It was a real question about Meghan Markle's carefully curated story. According to Candace, Meghan's entire pregnancy narrative is full of holes. The timeline doesn't make sense, and the details don't add up. Once the timeline was laid out in the open, the reaction was instant. Even professionals couldn't help but notice that the math just didn't add up. Did she really carry the babies? Or was there something else going on? Some of the things said seem bizarre. And yes, camera angles can play tricks on us, but the story still doesn't hold up. Meghan holding something with no bump showing. The sudden timeline of events, the rushed nature of it all. It felt like something that needed more scrutiny. Imagine the timeline. 2 epidurals, full labor, baby checked, paperwork done, bags packed, security briefed, and a drive back to Frogmore Cottage. All of this in a 2-hour window? It sounded more like a rush to catch a movie than the reality of childbirth. And the medical professionals, when they spoke about it, didn't mince words. It wasn't just unlikely, it was almost impossible. 1 epidural alone requires careful monitoring because of the effects it can have on your body. 2. That's something you don't just rush through. Doctors need to keep an eye on your vitals to make sure everything stays safe. And that's just the start of the concerns. Babies, especially firstborns, don't get checked quickly. The newborn checkups, the reflex tests, the feeding, the temperature stabilization. It all takes time, and that kind of rush just doesn't fit the reality of what's needed for a proper checkup. The professional reaction was clear. Something about the timeline, the details, just didn't match up. And when you add in the casual mention of 2 epidurals, it starts to feel like there's more going on behind the scenes than we're being told. It's a complicated situation, and people are noticing the inconsistencies. But whether we'll ever get the full truth or not, that remains to be seen. Unless something went seriously wrong, no hospital would ever discharge you in an hour. As people started reading through the timeline, it became clear that this wasn't a medical account. It was more like a PR-friendly fairy tale with a royal gloss added to it. When I was pregnant with my first, I remember how my belly looked at different stages. In January, it was still pretty small, but there was definitely a visible bump. It didn't look like the picture of what Meghan described in January, where she said her belly barely looked pregnant. Something didn't match up. Now, here's where things start to unravel. People familiar with the Portland hospital were shocked when they read Harry's version of events. He described the setting like some sort of dream, a tranquil spa-like atmosphere with dim lights and candles. This peaceful space where Meghan supposedly breezed through labor like she was on a cloud. But those who've actually been there know the reality. Portland isn't some maternity spa. It's a high-end private medical facility with strict rules, especially for high-risk births. Meghan was 37 at the time, and that alone meant she'd be under extra monitoring. It's not a place for soft lighting and essential oils. High-risk mothers don't get that kind of calm, Instagram-worthy ambience. They get bright, clinical lights, monitoring equipment, and lots of nurses following protocols. So, when Harry described a space that didn't sound anything like the Portland hospital, it raised some eyebrows. And let's talk about that nitrous oxide story. Harry casually mentioning how he accidentally inhaled all of Meghan's laughing gas. That's a detail that made medical professionals do a double take. Hospitals don't leave nitrous oxide just lying around for anyone to inhale. It's a controlled substance, always administered by medical staff. The whole idea of it being so casually available for Harry to just breathe in is completely unrealistic. The more people looked into it, the more it became clear. Everything Harry described about the birth, the atmosphere, and even the equipment sounded more like it came from a completely different place. And this left people wondering, what exactly was being described here? When medical experts started stacking all the inconsistencies together, the double epidural, the laughing gas incident, the strange spa-like setting, it didn't feel like a royal birth anymore. It felt more like a made-for-TV drama that didn't quite add up. Every new detail seemed to be a small crack in the timeline, and the more cracks, the harder it was to ignore. Then there's the awkwardness. The weird, bumpy appearance of Meghan's belly in some photos and the way she carried herself. It wasn't just about pregnancy. It looked more like insecurity or a lack of coordination. And sure, being awkward isn't wrong. Lots of people are. But when it's so noticeable, it starts to make you wonder, is this just how she's built? Or is something else at play here? The nitrous gas story? It might sound cute as a talk show anecdote, but in the real world, it's a huge safety risk. Hospitals don't casually leave gas tanks around. If Meghan was just enjoying being pregnant and Harry was proud of it, that's one thing, but we're talking about safety here. Medical professionals know what's at stake. Then there's the lighting. Dim, cozy, and relaxing? Absolutely not for someone who's just had an epidural. Especially for someone considered high risk. Doctors need clear visibility, not mood lighting. There's no room for aesthetics when it comes to ensuring patient safety. But the biggest red flag came when Harry mentioned how quickly they were discharged. Just 1 hour after delivery. That's medically unheard of, especially after an epidural, and especially for a first-time mother. Hospitals require hours of observation, just to make sure there are no complications. The risks are far too great to just send someone home that quickly. All of these inconsistencies made professionals pause, and when you put everything together, it starts to feel less like an honest account and more like a dramatized retelling. The more you look at it, the more the story starts to feel orchestrated, carefully curated, and a little too cinematic to be true. So, the question began to surface, first whispered, then louder. If the medical details don't add up, then what really happened on the day Archie was born? Was it all a carefully constructed story? Harry would definitely have been in on it. Some have even suggested that Harry didn't know Meghan used a surrogate, but that doesn't seem likely. Both Meghan and Harry seem to be involved in whatever narrative was crafted. But then things take a turn from a medical mystery to a royal anomaly. This is where the gossip mill truly went into overdrive, because when it comes to the royal family, one thing is clear: they live and breathe protocol. Everything they do is dictated by centuries of tradition and rules. They can't even sneeze without someone checking if it follows royal guidelines. So, when the birth of Archie happened, the strictest and most unbreakable protocol of all was suddenly ignored. The Queen wasn't notified. Not when Meghan allegedly went into labor, not when she was admitted, not when the birth was happening, and not when the baby was born. There was complete silence. This had never happened in modern royal history. Never with Diana, Kate, Sophie, or anyone else. The monarch is always informed immediately, because the line of succession is at stake. So, why wasn't the Queen told about Archie's birth? Royal watchers were baffled, palace insiders were confused, and even historians were stunned. Breaking this protocol wasn't a small mistake. It wasn't like misplacing a crown or a tiara. This was about the line of succession, the next heir to the throne. That's a huge deal. So, when the timeline started to wobble even more, people couldn't help but question everything. If no one informed the Queen, did they even know what to announce yet? Was the palace kept in the dark because they weren't ready to confirm anything. And then there were Meghan's shifting explanations. Each time she told the story of Archie's birth, it changed. A detail here, a new timeline there. And as her story kept evolving, the more royal reporters noticed that the narrative was becoming less consistent and more fragmented. At first, it was a little hard to believe, but when Meghan's explanations started to shift so dramatically, people started to question if the whole thing was just a narrative she was building as she went along. When reporters asked why the press wasn't notified about Archie's birth, Meghan didn't give a clear answer. Instead, she gave 3 completely different responses, each one contradicting the other. The first explanation was about not wanting the media to block the emergency entrance at Portland Hospital. But that excuse quickly fell apart. Portland doesn't even have a public emergency entrance. It's a private maternity clinic with no public access. So, that explanation didn't hold up. Then, Meghan shifted gears. Her second explanation was about racism. She claimed that the press didn't deserve a photo of her newborn because of their treatment of her. It was a strong statement, but it didn't line up with her first explanation. It was a completely different narrative. The third version? That was something else entirely. During an interview, Meghan claimed they did, in fact, notify the press, but the press just didn't show up. Anyone who's familiar with how the British media works knows this is impossible. When it comes to royal births, the press knows before the palace even sends out the official announcement. The media is there, cameras are ready, and reporters are posted up outside. They're like clockwork, as if it's the Olympics. The idea that the press was notified but just didn't show up doesn't make sense. 3 explanations, 3 contradictions, and no consistency whatsoever. Nothing lined up with the timeline or the details of the birth. The more people looked into it, the more the story seemed to fall apart, piece by piece. What was really going on behind the scenes? And why were the facts so difficult to pin down? Everything about Meghan and Harry's story started to feel a bit too orchestrated, like something straight out of a royal fairy tale. And that's when the whispers began. If the medical details don't add up, what really happened on the day Archie was born? First, Meghan had this huge belly, but somehow her tiny ankles were bracing herself in high heels. That's odd, right? And then, there was the whole preeclampsia claim. Preeclampsia is a serious condition that requires constant monitoring, magnesium drips, regular blood pressure checks, and no dim lighting or candles. You get a controlled environment with nurses on you constantly. But Meghan's experience didn't match that. Instead of lying in a hospital bed, recovering, she was flying internationally, attending events, and standing for long periods within weeks of giving birth. That's just not physically possible for someone recovering from preeclampsia. Meanwhile, a real Portland Hospital patient with preeclampsia shared her story. 230/130 blood pressure readings, constant treatment, and days in the hospital. But Meghan's version? A candle-lit room, laughing gas, a quick discharge, and soon after, international travel. None of that makes sense for someone with preeclampsia. So, if she really had preeclampsia, how did she recover so quickly? And if she didn't have it, why say she did? That's where the cracks in the story started to show. It's always the small, easily overlooked details that expose the truth. Like the time Harry claimed to have run out to Nando's at 2 a.m. to get food for Meghan. But here's the catch. Nando's closes at 11 p.m. Number 24-hour branches, no late-night runs. On top of that, Portland Hospital has 24-hour chefs. It's impossible for him to have gone out for food at that hour. Then there's the secret elevator. Harry mentioned it like it was a special royal passage, but the staff at Portland Hospital shot that down. There are no secret exits, no hidden tunnels. Every patient uses the same hallways. And then there's the confusion over who actually delivered Archie. One doctor's name was initially listed, But then another doctor came forward and said they weren't even involved. The palace corrected this, but then had to correct their correction. It was like someone was rewriting the story after it was already published. Royal births are some of the most controlled, documented events in history. But with Meghan and Harry's story, every part seemed to crumble under scrutiny. The inconsistencies just kept piling up, and the more people looked into it, the less it seemed like a royal birth and more like a poorly executed narrative. If you liked the video, subscribe my YouTube channel for more.